talk politics. With me now live are CNN political commentators Ben Ferguson and Marc Lamont Hill. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with me today. It's good to see you again.
Happy New Year. Good to be with you.
Happy New Year to you guys as well. Before the break, I know that you heard Jim Acosta's report about President Obama's desire to avoid being called a lame duck in his final year in office. You know, 1 year left for President Obama. Can he really stay relevant, do you think, Ben, in 2016? Is he just limited to executive action, or could we see him perhaps push through some legislation?
Well, he's never been very good at working with Congress, even when he had control of the House and the Senate. So I don't think that you're going to see the president try to get anything done that way. I think this last year is going to really be about a checklist. He wants to say close down Guantanamo Bay. He's been moving a lot lately to try to get more people out of Gitmo. And I think he also says, I'm going to act on guns through executive action. And you're going to see him use every power that he believes he has when it comes to executive action to get things done off his list that he wants, including climate change and other legacy building ideas. When it comes to actually working with Congress, I just don't see issues he's going to work with them on, because he's not worked well with them. He didn't work that well with Nancy Pelosi or Harry Reid, to be honest with you, outside of Obamacare. So I just don't see that happening. So, yeah, he's going to be powerful, but it's going to be an interesting lame duck year at the same time. In fact,
Marc, it kind of seems like, you know, he has struggled to work with Congress, certainly when it's been divided. He did not always have the best relationships, even with Democrats. Some of them say he's gotten past some of that. But now it may not matter when you have Republicans in both the House and the Senate. It seems like he might be trying to kind of go around Congress. You know, if he does an executive order, then it may be an issue for the courts, right?
Well, first, I don't want to accept as a matter of fact or as an article of faith that Obama just doesn't work well with Congress, because that language suggests that it's a one-sided affair. I could just as easily say Congress hasn't done a good job of working with President Obama, and that would force us to look at their ineffectual practices. That would force us to look at their disorganization and, quite frankly, their obstinance in terms of deciding that they're not going to pass forward any meaningful legislation as long as the Obama administration is in power. So this is a two-way street here, and I don't want to just keep saying Obama doesn't work well with Congress. That's misleading to the viewer. That said, I do think that President Obama is going to be one of the more powerful last year presidents, not because he has remarkable leadership and not because he's a visionary person, although I think he has some traits of both of those things, simply because he's using executive action. He's using signing statements. He's using other measures that will allow him to do this. Now, there are debates about the constitutionality of this. There are debates about whether the courts will intervene at some point. And I'm not entirely comfortable with the amount of executive actions that we've seen. But I think he is getting work done that the Congress has decided they're simply unwilling or unable to do. And so I think you'll see a very interesting year for all the reasons Ben laid out: climate change, more immigration stuff around drug reform, more prisoner releases for nonviolent drug offenders. All of these things I think will be things that will be on the table and will make for a very interesting 2016.
What do you think, Ben, about his relationship with Speaker Paul Ryan? This is someone who, during the negotiations between the White House and House Republicans, I know that the president and those around him really felt that he was the linchpin on some of those issues. But, you know, is there any sort of common ground? Is there any sort of meeting of the minds between these two guys?
We saw that with the budget deal that recently just happened. I mean, Paul Ryan did not make many friends in the conservative movement by what he did, which a lot of people felt like he just laid this perfect deal at the feet of the White House and what they wanted to make sure there wasn't a government shutdown instead of fighting a little bit. So far, if I'm President Obama, I'm loving the way that my relationship with Paul Ryan, and maybe there will be some things there they can work on. But ultimately, we've seen this consistently over this president's time in office, is that he does not like to negotiate with Congress, even when it's negotiating with his own members. And I think he seems, from this first step, making it very clear through these leaks and others that are talking to the media, he is going to use executive action in every way he can, which means I'm going around Congress. Or another way to translate it is I'm not going to waste my time dealing with Congress. And that's the one problem he's going to have, I think, with the courts is the president's job, whether he likes or not, is not to be a dictator on issues. If Congress isn't willing to act on issues, it doesn't mean you get to do what you want to do, however you want to do it. The Congress does play a vital role in Washington and a vital role in the way our laws are made. And so I think he's making it clear that he doesn't care about Congress. He's going to get his checklist out for his legacy. He's going to do as many of those boxes he can check by the end of the year. And if you want to come after him in the courts, he seems to be okay with that.
Marc, quick final thought to you on this. Guns and how this executive order will play on the campaign trail. So many Americans are in favor of what we expect President Obama is going to propose, which is tackling this gun show loophole.
Absolutely. And I think on the whole, the American people are on the side of President Obama on this particular issue. Unfortunately, the gun lobby is powerful, and Congress is not nearly as in bed with President Obama on this issue as the American people are. So what I think you'll see on the campaign trail, particularly on the Republican side, is people playing to the cheap seats, people playing to the gun lobby, people playing to Americans who probably have less of a central view on this. Most Americans want guns. They want access to guns. They want reasonable gun reform. They don't want to get rid of all your guns. But that's the type of demagoguery you're going to hear on the right. On the left, I think you'll hear people sort of aligning themselves with President Obama on this one issue. There'll be issues where there'll be distance, particularly foreign policy. But on domestic issues and gun issues in particular, I think the Democrats will be saying, hey, Obama got this one right.
Ben, I know you want to respond to that, but I'm going to leave it there for now.